Everybody, welcome back to Historians of the Movies podcast. I am your host and creator, Jason Herbert, and every single week we are talking about movies and the histories behind them. And this week we are not talking about a movie. We're talking about the lack of movies. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another emergency podcast here at HATM. Joining us for, I think, most of our emergency podcasts is my great friend, Craig Bruce Smith. Craig, how are you this morning?
I'm all right. So this one is absolutely an emergency. It's been an emergency since motion pictures began.
It has.
And to our great national shame, we're recording today on George Washington's birthday, but we do not yet have a big budget Hollywood Washington biopic. So I'm Craig Bruce Smith. You may remember me from such podcasts as this one all the time. Wrote American Honor, which you should absolutely buy. But like with all things, all views are my own and don't represent anyone's but mine. So you're going to hear a lot about George Washington today. Now, what was interesting is people are going to say that I must have come up with this topic today, or I must have been the spark behind this. That is not true, and we have to dispel this myth number one, of this founder chic. This idea of this new founder chic came from none other than Jason Herbert, man of the people. Is that not true, Jason?
Yes, I was thinking earlier about being a masculine historian and thinking about other masculine men through time. And obviously I thought about two men, George Washington and Craig Bruce Smith. But this is important, right? There are, and look, I don't want to debunk it, but look, there's a lot of historians out there who are just no fun at parties. And we have to talk about George Washington. And I think that one of the important things that we try to do with HATM over the last 6.5 years is talk about the importance of popular culture in storytelling, right? Because it can be an incredibly effective way about talking about the past, or at least pointing to things that we as historians then can curate around the past. That episode we did on the Patriot is such a great example of that, because we were able to talk about why this movie was important and then why they had to take so many liberties around that, right? And yet why it was still so much fun. But we don't have a Washington film. We don't have a Washington version of Lincoln, and we don't have a Washington version of Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. We don't have really anything. We don't even, it's almost as if Washington is hands off when it comes to popular culture.
It's tricky. So right out before our IMDb commandos hit us with a flood of comments, but what about his appearance in the Alexander Hamilton silent film in 19 blah blah blah, or
right.
There was a mini. Again, this is one I always get hit with when I voiced this in a couple articles I've done before about why is there not a Washington biography? Well, there was that one with Barry Bostwick in the 1980s, made for TV. And my response is, it's Barry Bostwick. It's made for TV in the 1980s. You also have Jeff Daniels, The Crossing, which, again, not big budget, not prominent. An A&E movie is not, up for Academy Awards. But yeah, aside from that, he's really not there. I mean, think of The Patriot. You see a little brief shot of him riding by, and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like even in The Patriot, they're like, we're not touching this guy, right? All these other guys are at fair game. We'll even do characterizations of them, but we can't touch Washington. And we'll talk more in this podcast, if you're listening in, about some of our favorite depictions of Washington. There are some fun ones. There are some good ones, I think, that we've seen out there. But what we want, I think Craig and I are trying to make the argument for, is we want more. We want our Washington picture, if anything, so we can talk about that as well. All right, so let's lay down some basic ideas. One of the reasons why I wanted to have Craig on here is because Craig is one of the Washington experts in the world. There's a lot of other great scholars out there, but Craig is the guy I'm closest with. So Craig gets the first call. Craig, he was born 294 years ago today. Can we talk a little bit? Can you give us a 2-minute introduction on the ethos of George Washington? Who is this man? And then maybe can we talk about some popular misconceptions around him in the past 300 years?
Washington's interesting. I mean, he's very human. I mean, there's oftentimes people are like, oh, he's this marble man. He's this, deified or, demigod or what have you. He's just a regular person. He goes through different periods of his life where he acts and behaves differently. Young Washington is very different from middle-aged Washington, which is different from older Washington. So he's constantly changing. There are certain themes, and I think there's a theme of he is very concerned about his reputation, about his sense of honor, how he maintains himself. But then he starts to think more about his country. Initially, country for him would have been the British Empire and Virginia. Then it becomes more about America. What I think the most important takeaways, I mean, he's brave. No one can fault this guy's bravery from an early age through later in life. I think the thing that is most important about him is his willingness to give up power. I've said it many times. Washington giving up power in 1783 is the most important moment in American history. I say that for me, I would say at the very least, it's arguable. If someone wants to say, well, the Declaration of Independence, yeah, sure, I'll give you that. But 1783 is what prevents the revolution from breaking down like so many other revolutions or civil wars have. And it's this devotion to civilian government that he keeps coming back to time and time again. I think that's what's crucial. But this is a person who for most of his life has been dedicated to public service. At the same time, he is someone who is conscious of how he behaves and what his personal behavior may affect. He believes that people are, especially in his later years from general on, people are looking to him. And if he does something that is wrong or contrary to the ideals of America, that could destroy all of it. Maybe there's some hubris there. Maybe he's taking on a bit more, giving himself too much credit. But in a lot of ways, I don't think so. People are looking to him. And a lot of the early foundations of the government, precedents that are set, are because it's Washington. If someone else does it work? I mean, maybe it does. But I think it's really, he's called the indispensable man. And I think that is kind of true. Again, we'll never know. But I would say that is probably the most important thing to do, that he recognizes that he has to hold himself to a certain standard so that the nation could hold itself to a certain standard.
All right. Well, getting into that, we'll break down some more stuff as we talk about. Like a little later on this podcast, guys, we're gonna construct our Washington film. So we will get into maybe some of the particulars about Washington's life and the things that happened and his views on the world as we go along. But Craig, you've written this tremendous book on Washington, which we'll post in the link as well through UNC Press, and then we'll also. I'm sorry?
You own 10 copies already, so.
I love this book. Actually, I've read your book. Thank you very much.
That's the first time you ever admitted that.
What's fun of being friends if I have to say nice things to you? It's like, whatever. But you wrote this book. You've been teaching on early American history for a very long time. This is your specialty. And of course, you're also a public-facing scholar. You talk to folks just in and outside the classroom. So I'm wondering, Craig, if you can talk to me a little bit about popular misconceptions when people come up and say, hey, well, you read a book on Washington. I heard this. Or is it true that happened?
Oh, that's fun. That's a fun one.
Yeah. Can you share with us stuff that you've heard or questions people ask you?
So I think it changes depending on the audience. So if you're talking to I even think there are some historians that get taken in by some myths or misconceptions or just don't know enough. I'm going to tell a story. That's not to knock on historians, but we're going to knock on historians.
Historians are the worst.
So I was at a conference. It was the first of the 250 anniversary conferences for the Stamp Act. And so this is 2015. And I don't even know who he was. I think he was an independent scholar or something, came in and just randomly said, well, George Washington was granted dictatorial powers by Congress in 1777 or whatever he said. Now, there's a room full of historians. Not a peep. Not a peep. Now, I think I had just I was brand new PhD. I didn't know who this guy was. I wasn't wading into this. And you got a room with like the heavy hitters. No one said anything.
Mhm.
That was completely not true. And he starts throwing out, well, as John Adams remarked, no one, and people were like, well, is that true? And he's like, yes, not a peep. So I don't think that's because people are buying into myth. I think it's because a lot about Washington is so misunderstood, and he has been less studied. And I remember ultimately, I think it was the George Washington papers. This is like the early days of Twitter, responded, no, that is incorrect. But let them say it. I wasn't, brand new PhD. Me was not saying it too, like,
and wisely, sir. You don't you get your PhD.
So I think there is some misconceptions, but again, I think it depends on the audience. So when I've spoken to like elementary school kids, even older, even to adults, the cherry tree comes up all the time.
Do you want to talk about cherry tree?
Yeah, let's talk about the cherry tree. So, did he chop down a cherry tree? I don't know. He could have. So there is no definitive story. This is invented by his later 19th century biographers. There is no account of Washington chopping down a cherry tree. What I do like to point out, and this is I'm not taking credit for this. This is Miles Smith, no relation. He likes to claim, well, I think it's based on some element of truth. And you know what? He could be right. The idea that he's a young boy, out on a plantation. I have no doubt he was given an axe, like a young Jason Herbert, probably given an axe for his 5th birthday. And when you're a young boy and you have an axe, what are you going to do? You're going to go chop something. Mm-hmm. What is he going to chop? Probably some wood. Could it have been a cherry tree on the property? Well, we know there were cherry trees on the property. Could he have chopped a cherry tree? Sure, why not? Could he have, lied to his father? Seems like something a kid would do. And then, did the flip-flop, conversion? It's a plausible story, but it's a metaphor. It's a parable. Washington becomes the sort of like, we've talked about it like this sort of demigod. It's a civic religion sort of parable. But no, there's nothing hard and fast to say that happened, but could something like it have happened? And as you know, Mount Vernon just discovered sort of like bottles and vials and jars of cherries from Washington's time. Clearly, they are from that cherry tree. And if you drink them, it will give you the power of eternal life if you choose wisely. But so yeah, that's one that comes up. The other one, obviously, the wooden teeth. That's an all-ager. So Washington did not have wooden teeth. He had dentures fashioned from a number of things: ivory, from human teeth. They're also from from the enslaved. And you could see those at Mount Vernon. So we could definitively say you could literally go and see his teeth. And no one wants to wear wooden dentures. So those are some of
No. And I mean, have you seen the Shane Gillis bit on Washington about going through Mount Vernon? Shane Gillis is a comedian who talks about
I've seen something. Daniel Galata sent me something. I just don't remember what it was about being afraid of a big, redheaded guy running at them. I think that was it. I don't know.
Yeah. Can we also talk about the size of Washington himself? Because as I understand it, he was 7 feet 6 inches tall. Could bench press 600 pounds.
Yep, 6 foot.
I mean, he was for his time a big man.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. He was absolutely big for his time. So there's the toes out, toes in measurements. So he's probably about 6'2", although, maybe a little taller. Depends if you look at, skeleton, feet out, feet in. So he's probably about 6'2", which is huge at the time. He's not the tallest founder. Thomas Jefferson's probably got him by 2 inches. But Washington, the myth and the legend of Washington makes him 6'20", as we know. So again, a lot of people ask about Washington's height. Surprisingly, that comes up a lot.
Hold on, Craig. We're having some difficulties here.
What's interesting, though, is Washington's size and appearance is something that's talked about even during his life. It's not just like this modern thing that people are sort of obsessed with.
Can you hear me now?
Like that.
You've frozen.
Am I breaking up on you?
You're back now. Okay. Like something had happened. So
I don't even remember. Did you get what I was talking about with him being big?
We'll find out. If not, we'll cut it out. It'll be fine. It's not going to break the thing.
No, but I'll just say it again, quick. So people do ask me, again, a lot of times, how tall was Washington? Probably about 6'2". Right. Is he the tallest founder? No. Jefferson's 6'4". Although there's the toes out, toes in measuring. Depends how you look at Washington. So people say, why do people ask? People always cared about Washington looked like, how tall he was. Yeah. It's something that's remarked upon at the time. So Abigail Adams is for instance, is one that's frequently, remarking on the well-fit appearance of this tall gentleman Washington. I'm making up the actual verbiage, but so people always, again, that's not really a myth, but something people are often asking about. Those are, I think, the big ones. Those sort of, and then there's other misconceptions that. I don't want to say they're misconceptions, but the idea of looking at Washington as almost perfect, like he'd never made mistakes. He absolutely makes mistakes. Whether it's in hindsight or at the moment. So I think that's another thing that, Washington makes mistakes. Washington does things that are wrong. But he's often reflective about it, and he tries to improve. There's some things he's just, he's got a bad temper, and when he's younger, he's got an ego, and it gets him into trouble sometimes.
Yeah, Craig, I think you make a really good point here, and this is the thing I find myself wrestling sometimes with other scholars about, or just kind of rolling my eyes when I see things or whatever. Is that first off, you're looking for perfection, you've come to the wrong species.
Yeah.
Right. You're not going to find a perfect human. You're not going to find a perfect leader of men and women or anything like that. And I think that in a lot of ways, the imperfections of a George Washington, of an Abraham Lincoln, of a Martin Luther King Jr., of whomever, right, should inspire hope in our own lives, because it's like these people are regular people with their own troubles, their own personal traumas, their own things they're working through. They make mistakes. And you know what? You will too. And that's okay. You hopefully will do as maybe a Washington does or whomever, learn from them and continue on. I mean, on a very personal level, these are stories about what it is to be human.
Exactly. So the thing I often teach on and say in talks is, if you make them gods, if you put them in stone, then no one could ever be, there could never be another Washington, there could never be another Lincoln, there could never be another Martin Luther King, whoever. But if they're human, we can aspire. We can maybe not all the time. Maybe there are just these moments of greatness, these moments of perfection. But if they're these gods, then why even try? And I think that's the biggest thing, especially when the founders of all types get sort of like deified.
Well, let's talk a bit about immortalizing these presidents. We'll keep this to a presidential conversation in light of Washington's birthday and the recent President's Day. Let's talk a little bit about this. Are we surprised, Craig, that we have not really seen a major motion picture biopic of Washington, really, say, in the modern era? Say anything from, say, 1965 forward.
Yeah, it is kind of surprising. I mean, if you think about it, we've gotten movies on presidents that are far less consequential historically than Washington. And I'm saying again, I am not commenting on any presidents that are still alive. I'm sticking to dead presidents here. But we've seen movies on presidents that are not even in discussions with Washington. But I guess I think a lot of it's a recency bias, perhaps. But in some of it, there's even, questionable casting, where it's like, are you even trying to depict that person? Or it's just like, well, we got this actor.
Well, okay. And that brings up the thing. I wonder, Craig, because you think about all the movies that have come out, say, in the last 50 years, right? even with the ones that are focused on a president, Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, there have actually not been that many presidential biopics, or where the president, 13 Days would be a good example of where he's not the Bruce Greenwood's. I really enjoyed his take on JFK.
About the event rather than JFK.
It's the event, but okay, it's not quite a biopic, but it's definitely he's there, right?
Yeah.
And then of course there's the stuff. I mean, maybe our biggest presidential film is Air Force One, right? Where if the president becomes a character, get off my damn plane.
Yep.
But we don't really, think about it. What are the films that we like a real actual biopic? There's Lincoln.
Wasn't there Nixon with Anthony Hopkins? There
was an Anthony Hopkins Nixon. Of course, everyone's going to point to the terrific John Adams series that was on HBO several years back. As we can go ahead and count those as big budget films. That's fine. If it's a series, it's fine.
You've got Bush and Reagan now.
There's the most recent Reagan thing with Dennis Quaid.
Yep.
And then so you had W.
Yep.
And you also we can also count the Cheney one, right? Should we count Cheney?
A VP movie.
It's like, it's a VP movie. But it's president adjacent, and besides, we got Sam Rockwell as George W. Bush in that film, and he's just so much fun. But we don't have. We never got a Washington film. Of course, we've had the Hamilton stuff, which is Washington adjacent.
Yes,
we do have Washington obviously as a character in that series, or in that musical. We never got our Washington movie. Why, Craig? Why don't we have a Washington movie? Where is there not an interest? Do you think?
I honestly don't know. So I have heard. So my advisor in grad school, David Hackett Fisher. So his book.
Well, Fisher was your advisor?
Yeah, I told you that.
Do I know that? I don't know that I know that.
No, you should have. Anyway,
I read Paul Revere's Ride on the plane to Boston for the first time.
So you bring up Paul Revere.
Okay, go on.
You bring up Paul Revere's Ride. I can't tell you how many times he has sold the movie rights to that book. And
you have to have Jack Black as Paul Revere. I'm sorry.
But he actually wanted Danny DeVito. That's a whole other thing. Anyway,
all right.
That movie's never been made. I don't know how it hasn't been made. And he told me at one point, and I don't know how true this is, I haven't been able to confirm, that he was told that movies about the American Revolution don't get made because they don't do well at the global box office. Maybe that's true. I don't know. But I would argue that Washington has international appeal, and he's had international appeal. I'm working on a book called The Greatest Man in the World, with all these different nations talking about Washington. I don't know. Maybe it's because for a lot of times there was a fear of getting him wrong, or maybe, going back even to the 1950s, that, it would have been just this deified version. But I'm shocked we never even got this pure Washington, American God. We've never even had that. So I don't have an answer.
And we've never even gotten the miniseries either, right? No. Something from HBO or Netflix. Netflix has got Candace Millard's book on Garfield. Is coming out later this year, and I'm excited about seeing
Garfield.
That presentation.
And
why not?
And the Garfield Twitter master is gone, so I'm not going to get zinged.
I know.
But come on, Garfield and not Washington.
Listen, maybe not Washington, but I'm great. Let's absolutely have a discussion about the Garfield presidency.
No, I'm not. That's not a knock.
This is great.
That's not a knock.
Let's talk about Grover Cleveland. I want to talk about American history.
Yeah, no, we absolutely should have these things. I'd rather have that than these reboots and remakes and. But I'm just saying that the idea of someone somewhere said we're going to greenlight Garfield, but Washington, people don't want that.
Right. Sure. Well, maybe we need to have a super talented, and this is, I really mean this, Candace Millard's a really talented pop historian and has done a tremendous job writing some really accessible stuff for people to understand American history in the past and stuff like that. Maybe that book is out there.
I'm to be honest,
or waiting to be written.
I'm shocked Chernow's Washington never happened, especially after all the Hamilton, bump. I'm shocked.
I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen the Grant film off of Chernow, but we'll get into that. I have a couple actually. So I have a couple reasons why, three reasons why, and we've kind of glossed over them already. Why we may not have seen a Washington film thus far. I wonder, Craig, about the idea of the difficulty not in telling the story of a man, but of a god. You kind of talked about how in times Washington gets deified in American culture, especially these early presidents become so important to really the popular myth. Every nation state has its own myth-making origin story, right? They all have it. And Washington is the single most important aspect of this. So I wonder, this is almost like telling the story of a god in ways. It's like, because he's larger than life. It's not about talking about Howard Hughes.
Sure, it could be, but think about how many Hercules movies we've had.
Fair enough, right? So Zero to Hero, Washington.
And so, I can go the distance,
Right.
It's we've had religious movies. We've had literally, think about like The Passion.
Exodus, Gods and Kings.
Yeah.
The greatest movie ever.
But think about The Passion.
Ridley.
The Passion, is that I don't know how they judge box office anymore, but for a while that was like the champ.
It was very high up there, and I think remains. And of course, they're making a sequel to it.
So
a prequel sequel. I don't know.
So I'm just saying, there has not been a shyness about depictions of deities on screen. So
true, right? And we've seen obviously Ten Commandments and other things like that.
One of the great old
and sure, absolutely, right. But I do wonder if maybe that's just like a hurdle, or there's like an unfamiliarity. Maybe it's the difficulty in finding the ability to relate to Washington. Yes. I don't know. Is that it?
That's a great point. So it's been said, again, I don't remember who said it, so I'll just say it has been said.
Right.
The reason Washington's become unrelatable is because of his portrait on the dollar bill. It's an older Washington with severe dental pain, dentures, who's older. That Washington is often depicted, the older, certainly more stoic, tempered individual makes him less relatable. Whereas Ben Franklin's practically doing finger guns on the $100 bill. And and that's what makes the relatable founder. So I think a lot of it is that he has been built up to such a point that he may be less relatable than someone like a Ben Franklin, who just got not only a Ken Burns miniseries, but a docudrama. But what's the big takeaway? Oh, him and French ladies.
So speaking of which, Joanne Freeman came on that series, which you came on as well. Well, we covered the Ben Franklin series on Apple. And one of the things Joanne and I spoke about on that episode was the idea that every time you do, and you're just speaking right here, every time we speak of Washington, or in our minds, I close our eyes and think about Washington, it is of this 60-year-old gentleman with the wig.
Well, never wore a wig, only powdered his hair.
Okay. Powdered his hair, excuse me. Another popular misconception then. But it's hard to imagine George Washington at 22 years old or whatever at Fort Duquesne, right? It's hard to imagine him starting this 7 Years' War. Maybe we can talk about the great oops in history. George Washington may have inadvertently caused the American Revolution. So, I mean, there's that. It's a bit of a stretch, but it's still a fun aspect to it.
Make a case that he literally is the one that flicks the pebble or kills the dragonfly or whatever that starts this whole.
He's the butterfly wings or whatever, right? I mean, very much so. Well, if you guys haven't, if you're not familiar with the story, we can get into it in a bit. But yeah, there's a bit of this. I think also you spoke a little bit about this earlier. The idea that it's a period piece. Yeah. The period pieces tend to be more expensive. If we look recently at the Napoleon film by Ridley Scott, incredibly expensive film. You've got to source all this stuff. You have to do all this training, the costuming, the outfits. You've got to move all the Cadillacs and Mitsubishis and Fords out of the way so you can create the era and space. So they tend to be cost prohibitive. But I don't know that that's still keeping you from doing a very one of the great things about Lincoln was a big film.
Yeah.
But it was also a very internalized film. It was really spending a lot of time trying to think about the intellectual hurdles Lincoln was trying to navigate to get the 13th Amendment passed, right? And all this kind of stuff. There were the side quests and stuff like that with James Spader, and it's fun. But ultimately, it was a very inward-looking film at the relationships he had with the law and also with his wife. So I'm kind of wondering,
you theoretically
could you not do that?
Can do a really good historical piece where you don't need like Michael Bay explosions every 2 feet. I think it could be done. The big question, and this is one I talked about. We're going to talk about it later, I'm sure. But I think where Lincoln did it right, where other movies like let's say a Napoleon or what have you didn't. I think it's too hard to cover an entire life in one movie.
Yeah. I think that's what we're going to talk about later on.
So I think
it's too much.
That's the one way you get around it.
Well, and again, going back to this idea why we haven't seen so many precedents. So, I've got some stacks. I'm working on some stuff on Theodore Roosevelt, as you know, and Theodore Roosevelt is again another one of these super charismatic guys, larger than life, and yet we have and scores of books, written on Roosevelt, an entire mythology of the outdoors and all these things built around Roosevelt. And we still have not seen a Roosevelt biography. And I wonder, by the way, if you try to find a Roosevelt book, they're all this big, right?
There's plenty of
massive
material. I mean, what do we have Roosevelt in? We have him like in Newsies saying bully. That's about it.
Yeah. So there was the great, and I'll get roasted on this. History Channel had a great series years ago called Men Who Built America.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I taught it in high school. Now I curated it, right? Yeah, a lot because that's the job, because ultimately there's a lot of good and bad in there, but he's in that series as well. But there was a rumored that DiCaprio was going to play Roosevelt, but other than like Robin Williams in Night at the Museum, I can't really think of a Roosevelt in pop culture. Maybe our listeners can chime in on this one. I'm certainly not immune to being wrong on this stuff. I want to address the other big part here, which is, and you and I have talked about this as well, which is slavery. George Washington held men and women and children in bondage, right? And this is part of the story. It's not the only aspect of his life, but do you think, Craig, that the fact that he was an enslaver, that he held people in bondage, how do you address that in the film? Do you think that keeps people from going to a film? Because, they danced around that when we saw Patriot. They just, all these people are living here and they're free and we're happy. And they're going to build us a house at the end of this. How do we really navigate the fact that George Washington was this guy, and I'm speaking in broad terms, and please correct me if I'm wrong, who fought for liberty and justice and all of these things, and yet kept African people in a state of perpetual servitude. Can we speak a little bit about that? Because we have to, right?
Washington's and I think he's also more complicated than he gets credit for. And I think there's been a very much a historian focused push on vilifying the founders, at least since the 1970s, that Washington and many others have found themselves caught up in. Though I tend to find it always starts with Jefferson and then it comes to Washington. But yeah, this is true. He owned slaves. Absolutely. Fact. How would you depict it in a movie? Again, that's what makes it difficult, because it's something that you can easily, to a modern audience, say, look, this is not someone we should look to. But again, I think the purpose is to put him in perspective of his time, in his environment, how he understood slavery. Now, are there abolitionist people, or at least anti-slavery during his time? Yes, absolutely.
It's a vice president, right? Sure.
But it's relatively small. When you're talking, there are people that are anti-slavery. Does that necessarily mean they're abolitionists? That's a whole other thing. So you could be opposed to slavery, but does that mean you want to end slavery? Again, it's infinitely more gray. But it's a relatively small percentage of the population. And Washington's views on slavery are going to evolve over time. Initially, he's opposed to having slaves serve in the Continental Army, even free African Americans serve in the Continental Army. He's ultimately going to change that, partially due to seeing their service in combat. Later in his life, he is going to become very much interested in anti-slavery. And this is his will, where he does free the slaves that he owns. There's a whole question of those owned by his wife, the Custis slaves. He does free them. Granted, there are provisions whereupon it's upon Martha's death, but he does free William Lee, his personal sort of valet. But this oftentimes gets dismissed as, it's he no longer had need of them, or some other ways to wave it away. But at that moment, domestically and internationally, it's recognized as a great anti-slavery document, as one of these first major anti-slavery moments. Washington had been sort of reluctant to speak out against slavery because he knew what it could do to the country, and he knew sort of how he was viewed. So how do you depict it in film? To hide it is incorrect. And I think it all depends where and how what moment in time you depict Washington. If you are showing him at home at Mount Vernon, it's a plantation. Slaves would be present. If you are showing him at a various moment, let's say on campaign during the American Revolution, the presence of slaves or even free African Americans may be lessened, but his enslaved valet, his companion throughout the whole war is William Lee, who's always there by his side. So he's so at his side, you'll see him in period portraits depicted alongside Washington, considered alongside Washington as one of the great horsemen of the age. So to have a Washington film without William Lee is to basically distort the fact that he is there at all these moments. Just like Martha Washington is following Washington on campaign during the Revolution. She would be there. So to not have, again, is Martha Washington out, stabbing a redcoat with knitting needles on the battlefield? No. But she's there. So I think depictions of, look, here are enslaved, here are women, etc., they're there. But if you're making the focus of a movie about Washington slavery, that's not how he was understood during his time or in the aftermath, aside from there are obviously moments where people focus on that. But Washington as a figure, as a symbol, was not viewed as standing for or representing slavery.
Yeah. I've often kind of thought about this, and just the idea is like, I wonder, this is not a reason to not make a film, but it's a reason because it paints what we would consider a really unlikable quality about a guy that, if we're making we want to like our protagonists in a film. We want to like our heroes, right? And then how do we wrestle with this? And of course, that was, like we said earlier, Patriot just jumped right past that and said, now they're all free, right? In South Carolina and stuff. So, I mean, and you really owe it. And this is one of the regards, like when I was talking to Ed Zwick about the idea, it's like, when do you take liberties with the story, right? He's like, as long as you're keeping, the emotional truth of the story correct. In this regard, you can't get past it. You really do have to say, this is like, look, this is one of the complications of being a human in this area. And it's not an endorsement of Washington as an enslaver. He was an enslaver. And then I think you have to say all of these things together.
So again, there were different perceptions at the time. This is kind of his thinking. We see it evolve again.
Sure.
Really, I think a film is about a balance of accuracy and entertainment.
Yep.
That if you are outright making things up, then it loses some of its value. But it shouldn't be a 2.5 hour let's vilify the founders and look at all the ways we are morally superior, because 100 years from now, when someone's making a movie about the life of Jason Herbert, they will just point out all the ways that you are wrong and have morally failed.
Yeah. Well, I think, Craig, that brings us to a really good point here, which is the idea of accuracy in entertainment. And that is we talked earlier about the lack of Washington appearances in film and series and so forth. We're just popular culture, we'll say. There are a few, however. So I want to at least get into, and you are the expert here. I too am an early Americanist, though my focus is on indigenous Florida and the Southeast. So I am not the expert when it comes to Washington. That's why I wanted you here. Can we talk about what you consider to be your favorite Washington performances across the mediums?
Okay, so there are. It's tough because he pops up in a lot of places, from animated, George Washington in The Simpsons fighting murderous pirate Hans Sprungfeld, to one of the worst depictions was in the History Channel's Sons of Liberty, where it's like Washington's constantly like giving these impromptu speeches and like shouting. You'd argue that George Washington YouTube video, I think that thing's got like 100 million views or whatever. That might be the most impactful. Lots of documentaries, right? History Channel did a 3-part one and they do have, an actor doing some scenes, but again, it's not the same. So I've got 3 that I really like.
Okay, go for it.
So I think Christopher Jackson in Hamilton does a fantastic job, right? I think acting-wise, portrayal of Washington, his mindset, I think he's spot on. But Washington isn't singing before the Battle of Yorktown. A lot of other stuff happens. He's, I would argue he's the star of Hamilton, but, his name isn't above the...
First of all, he's rapping.
Yeah,
go on.
Yes, which Washington would... What is this rap?
Right. It's dropping a funky
on
beat.
My legs, you're right. Christopher Jackson, great actor, does a great job. He does not look like Washington. He is not portraying Washington as Washington would have been.
All right.
Great job, though. My 2, and I like them both for different reasons, and I think one has more to work with. So he is Ian Kahn in Turn, who plays a younger Washington, so like a 40s Revolutionary War era Washington.
This is a necessary thing because we tend to think of Washington as this elder gentleman, and it's like, and I think that's one of the reasons why he's so hard to get to know, because it's hard to get to know him as a guy in his 20s or 30s or 40s. So this is like a younger guy. You and I are both in our 40s, so I think it's much more relatable. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. So I think he does a really good job there. He's got more to work with. It's also it's a series, so he's got more time to develop the character. It's also, about espionage. So it's got a little bit more where you're dramatizing. One thing I think he had that he gets right, and I think it's great, is it also makes a great GIF, is when he gets hugged by Lafayette. And sort of gets the double French kiss, and he's sort of not sure what to do with this. I think that's spot on. But I'm going to argue probably my favorite, because I think he gets it right. And I think if you're playing a part like George Washington, an actor wants to act that hard. You want to, you're going to do it up. The one who doesn't, the one who I think therefore is the closest to realism.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
David Morse in John.
No question.
Series.
No question.
I think he's the best because I think he's probably the closest. So can you imagine an actor getting cast at Washington and then just whispering your first inaugural? just saying as few words as possible, which is accurate because his teeth really hurt.
Yeah.
I think that's the closest to realistic. Now, no knock on David Morse. I like David Morse. I mean, he was great in The Rock, great in John M's miniseries, but he's not carrying a big Hollywood picture, regardless of how accurate he is.
He's not. He's terrific, and he's really perfect in the role. I think that's the reason why that John Adams series works. The casting in that series is starting with, frankly, with Tom Wilkinson as Ben Franklin, which, just so everybody knows, that was the series that put Ben Franklin on. Really, like, in my head, I have a son named Benjamin Herbert entirely because of the way that Wilkinson in that show introduced me to Franklin, and I started reading all this kind of stuff. Because I, my friends, am down with some founder chic. Can I offer to you, Craig, 2 other portrayals?
Sure.
One is Nate Bargatze. I can never pronounce it. The SNL stuff that we've seen, the two performances recently, are so much fun. They're great, and that's the fun thing you can do with history, right? And that's like that's okay. Those are great entryways. It's like, okay, and look what they're doing. Like, the big point is, like, they're dancing around the slavery thing on both sketches we've seen so far, right? You can have a lot of fun with this. Not every history thing has to be history.
So,
So
the one thing that happens when you teach about George Washington and your Twitter content is nothing but posting things about George Washington is when something George Washington comes out, you get like 50 texts and emails with the same thing. So when that first one came out, I am always skeptical, especially when I came in and I saw Washington with a beard, highly inaccurate. The historian alarm goes off. Then I watch, I'm like, all right, that's pretty good. So that has to be one of the best. I think SNL, has kind of fallen off, but that's some of the best stuff they've done in 20
years. Yeah, it really is. And apparently the backstory on that is that it was not selling early on. They really had to do it live on the dress rehearsal, and then it killed, and then and now he's going to come back a third time to do it. They're just too much fun.
The first one I think is infinitely better because the second one tried to just redo it. I think it lost some of the magic. I think now what would be funnier is if they had him just out of nowhere appear in different scenarios in SNL, right? Like,
I think it'd be
just
fun.
A regular sketch and something straight, one of these, oh, we're going to watch the football game. And then just like the boat comes in from the side and, but no, I thought he did a great job. Is it accurate, Washington? Absolutely not. Is it funny? Yes. Could you, and could you show that in class? Absolutely. And does that get you into a discussion? Yeah, I think it does. And
that's it's everything a historian needs. I want to give you one last one. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Hall of Presidents, Walt Disney World.
Fair. And it is a good one.
It's good. It's a good watch. I used to work at Walt Disney World. I've seen that performance change over time. We've seen the Hall of Presidents story change over time since 1998. Every time I go to Walt Disney World, I'm there in Liberty Square. I go in there. It's air conditioned. They've got all the stuff, the memorabilia there. Craig, I get goosebumps because despite all of the things, all of the troubles in American history, the ups, the downs, stuff like that, I still want to believe in the greatness of America, the potential. And I watch that and I hear Washington speak with a portrayal and I go, man, this is what I believe in. This is like this is why I got into history.
Yes. I'm with it. I didn't see that one coming. You're outsourcing all the jobs, the actor jobs to the robots. So SAG will be calling.
Jason is pro AI is what you're saying.
That's how you get Skynet. But
can't make it through it. We have never made it through a pod without referencing Terminator.
But think about it. So if Skynet starts and the first T-800 off the line is a George Washington, like
There goes Craig. There goes Craig looking for a hug.
But anyway, no, I think it's a great pick. But Washington is what's best about America. Again, I'll say that, and then they revoke my historian card when I say, you know what, Washington should be celebrated. I'm not saying you
Absolutely.
tell lies or you hide factual information, but I think there are some people that are able to personify ideas or have these perfect moments. I think he's got a couple of them.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think both of those are. So if you can somehow negotiate with Robo Washington's agent, maybe you get him.
All right. So let's bring to our big thing here.
Sure.
Historians of the movies. We're going global.
Yep.
We're going to start we are going to start our own production at some point in time. But for now, let's make our own Washington film. Craig, you're the Washington expert. I'm the film guy.
All right.
What's our Washington movie? How do you do? Are we making a movie? Or are we making a miniseries?
All right.
Let's start with there.
Money,
film or series? Which way do we go?
Money, no object. I do a Lord of the Rings style trilogy and release it for 3 Christmases in a row.
Okay, no. We've got to make this where this thing will make money, because we just saw Kevin Costner went money, no object, and there may not be any more Horizon films.
Well, it's also, you think he would have learned with Waterworld, but dry land is not a myth. So,
yeah, okay.
All right. So again, I think you do.
Let's make a real film.
I think you do a film, because I think miniseries are great. You could better develop the character. 100%. I would love a miniseries, but miniseries aren't going to get the same attention. They're not going to get the replay value in schools, the one-time watch. There's a commitment for a miniseries. I mean, depending how many episodes, right? You could be talking 10 hours. Whereas a film, you can get someone for 2.5 hours, and you can walk away
2.5 hours.
Really good themes, generate some interest. You know what? If you win some Oscars, that's I'm going to film. A nice 2.5 hour film. I don't want like a 4-hour director's cut where they're, I want a tight 2.5 hours that covers an event. You could have flashbacks if you want to other things or allude to things to come, but I think it's a singular event. So then it becomes, what event do you pick? I would again, personally, I think the most important, as I said, is Washington giving up power. But I don't think that makes the best movie. Writing speeches, going in front of Congress. I don't think that sells. So what is? I think crisis. The bigger the crisis, the bigger the issue. Perhaps the greater potential for greatness. So I know it's been done for A&E. A&E is not Hollywood. I do Washington's Crossing. I focus it literally on 2 days. For, the build up to Washington and that Christmas crossing of the Delaware River. You could allude to things earlier. You could have flashbacks, however you want to do it. But I think it's fundamentally that Christmas, 1776. I think that is your moment. You release it right before Christmas. Then you have the new, is this the new Die Hard? Yes, it is. Because Washington, as we say, is America's first action hero.
Absolutely.
So I think that's
all right. Okay, so let's cast it.
Okay.
And I love this because it's exactly, Craig, what I'm thinking as well. And I think your idea is like, we can do some flashbacks about how Washington got to get here for if he's in his tent or whatever, right? Let's take a couple 3 main characters here, people that people might be familiar with.
Yeah.
Who do we cast as George Washington? And these will be actors. Now, see, how old is Washington in 1776?
He's born in 1732. So
39.
So so you need it again. It
40ish.
40. I mean, I don't think you can go younger than late 30s, and I don't think you can go. Yeah. You can probably go mid 50s if you wanted. Okay. Look, it's the 18th century. Bad medicine. So I think you're probably in that 40, 55-ish range, give or take.
55 feels too old for me on that. I think you got to go. I think you got to go 35 to 44.
I don't know,
somewhere in the range.
I think
40ish.
Sure, 40ish. Again, so when I've been talking about this for years. So when I first started, and I know I think we did this on Twitter or wherever some
right
at the time when whenever ago. I still think he could do it. He's probably, if we're saying the person has to be in their 40s, he's on the wrong side of that now. At the time, he was spot on perfect. Hugh Jackman got the height, got the commanding presence. Would look good on a horse. Think Kate and Leopold. I think would have worked, and he can do an American accent. But what
it's too old now.
Yeah, but now he's 56. I don't know it'll work.
Right.
No. What we should do is just cast whoever has the most muscular thighs. That's the real way to cast Washington.
I actually have a thought here. Are you ready for this?
Sure.
Henry Cavill.
He could. I could see it. I could actually see that. This is a little bit out there, and I don't know.
Please.
His American. Sam Hugan from Outlander.
Yeah.
Right? 6'4". He knows he's been living in the 18th century for years now.
Okay.
I think he could do it. Again, does he have the same household name? I don't know. I think Cavill could do it. How tall is Cavill? He's got to be
Cavill 6'3", 6'2", 6'3".
That'll work. I could see that. And my other, and again,
he might be too handsome.
But the thing is, everyone's remarking on Washington. The other, and then this is my other. Depending if you want to go big budget, blockbuster Washington, Chris Hemsworth.
Okay. I like Hemsworth a lot. I don't think he's got the act. I don't think he's got the acting chops.
I don't know. I've never
for this because you're really going to need an inward guy. I'm scrolling here looking for like 40-year-old actors.
I honestly
right now
I think my pick is Sam Hugan. I just don't know if he's
okay.
I haven't heard him do an American accent.
Okay.
But he just seems comfortable. He's been doing Outlander so long. He's
in that era.
Comfortable in that era. I think with some tweaks, he could be really great. And so we could, we could make a series of George Washington films. Like he could be the American James Bond. But then that brings up the question of, does Washington have to be an American? Is this like Bond, where he has to be from the British Empire? And I think if he is, it complicates it.
George Washington wasn't an American.
Well, he became one.
He became the first American, right? But he was a Virginian, right? He was a member. He was a member of the Empire.
Yeah,
so I don't know, right? What about William Lee? How old is William Lee compared to Washington?
Let me look it up.
It's still hard for me to get David Morse out of my head when I think about Washington. He just looks right.
Yeah, William Lee was born. He was purchased in 1768. So he died in 1810, about 60. So 1750, give or take. So he's probably in his 20s.
Man, that's tough. Okay.
Why not? Maybe Anthony Mackie. He could be from Captain America to the right.
Mackie's too old.
Hollywood magic.
I have a thought. And my guess is Daniel Kaluuya.
Okay.
From Get Out and Black Panther and some of the other stuff. I think he's got he's too old, right? But if we're using Hollywood magic and all that, I think Daniel Kaluuya could be the dude. He's really good. He's a really good actor.
It's some of them. I mean, again, I I'm open on pretty much anyone here. I think if you get Washington right, and then you build around.
Okay.
But yeah, it could be. Sure, why not?
All right. So he's riding back. Let's assume that we've got some riding back and forth between the battlefield and home.
Yep.
Who's Martha?
All right. So here's again. You've probably seen the artist reimagined versions of Martha Washington, where she's younger, and more attractive than the kerchief wearing
real
Martha. So our depends how Hollywood we're going here. I could see again. So what age range are we going? I guess we're going the same sort of. She's.
I'm amending my Washington pick, by the way.
Oh, are you? Okay, let's see who we got.
I'm going David Cornsweet. I'm going the next Superman.
I don't even know who that is.
6'4" tall. Google him. Looks the part.
What's his name?
Really looks the part.
David what?
Cornsweet. Corenswet.
Yeah, I could see it. I could see that.
He's 31 right now.
Yeah,
like we could stretch that during production.
So let's say it takes us a little while to get our funding, but I can see it.
To production?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. All right.
I'm okay.
All right. So who do we like? Who do we like as Martha?
Martha's a year older, so again, someone in their 40s range. What about
okay?
What about Natalie Portman?
She's she could work. My suggestion on this is Rachel Brosnahan, who is going to be the new Lois Lane. And essentially, I'm taking the entire.
You're just going down the
I'm taking the entire. Portman could work. Problem is Portman's so ridiculously beautiful. I mean, you'd have to go with like the monster.
Well, look
thing with Charlize.
Look
right?
at the young depiction of Martha Washington. The younger depiction.
Okay.
Pull it up.
Okay.
And I think you could go with it.
Again,
my head, is initially to go with, sort of someone who's played more aristocratic.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you could work
more
that.
aristocratic types. I could just years ago, I could have seen a Connie Nielsen or a Kate Blanchett or someone like that. But I think I think you need a strong actress who could hold up against a strong lead. And Natalie Portman's
I got Evan Rachel Wood as my Martha Washington.
Evan Rachel. Okay.
I think she could do it
lately. I don't even know.
I don't know, but every time I've seen her herself, I think she's terrific. She's really talented, and she holds up. Okay, so we've got our three leads here. Let me ask you this: we're coming out. We've got our Washington movie. We're greenlit. We're going to make bank, so forth. Everyone, we're going to be the first two profitable historians in history, along with David McCullough. Here's my question, Craig, as we get down here to this idea. We've talked about this, and I hate doing this presidential thing, but it's fun. My kids love to do this all the time. So can we talk just briefly? 4 is too easy. I want for you to give me your 5 best/favorite presidents, because you can choose either your 5 best or your 5 favorite. They don't have to be the exact same. They are often different. Yep. 5-1. Who do you got? Best or favorite presidents?
Okay, so here's the thing. I co-host another podcast called Jawbone, and we literally for President's Day did our top 5 presidents.
All right, so
it's releasing today. So I'm gonna give you what I gave there. So
terrific.
So we're going,
and we'll put a link to that one as well.
Yeah. So again, as I said, some of these I'm being perhaps a little bit more controversial. I'm trying to say something different here.
Please.
So my 6th and honorable mention was George Herbert Walker Bush. Why? Because I think he navigated the end of the Cold War in a way that things could have gone really wrong. And I also think he's really focused on having a clear objective when sending troops in places. So that's why I had.
Yeah, can I jump in on that? he lost that re-election somehow shockingly, considering it was when they come out of Persian Gulf War. I continually think that and I know that your positioning of him at 6 is higher than most, but I think that the way we will continue to think of him, I think that number will continue to get closer and closer to your 6.
I think he's going to improve, but
I think we're going to get a Truman-esque reevaluation of him. I'm sorry, go ahead.
My number 5, John Adams. Why? Again, there's a lot of people can criticize certain things he did as president, and this as what I've said, and your other frequent guest, Lindsay Chervinsky, will agree with this. Adams helped solidify Washington's precedents, and he's responsible for coordinating the first peaceful transition of power between opposing parties. So Washington sets the precedents. Absolutely, all credit to Washington, but Adams sees it through, especially during a really controversial election. My number 4 is Harry Truman. And because, again, he's navigating both the thrust into the end of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War. And he's forced with making a nearly impossible decision. That, we can still debate today. Is it right? Is it wrong? But we know that his decision ends World War II, saves lives. He deserves credit for that. Number 3, because it's a podcast about movies, who better than our actor president, Ronald Reagan, for navigating the end of the Cold War. For bringing about the end of the Cold War. Again, we could argue about other things, but I'm saying,
I don't know who you're going with on number 2, but the fact you're leaving out one or the other, because I know where number 1's going to go.
It's good to go. Number 2, Abraham Lincoln. I think there.
So you're putting Ronald Reagan above Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Yes.
Are we friends anymore?
He broke a Washingtonian precedent. So no, I have Lincoln because I think there's a clear drop off after 2. I think 1 and 2 are miles ahead. So Lincoln, number 2, you could, major crisis, sees the nation through. Why do I put him? Why do I put Washington? Again, obviously Washington's 1. Why do I put Washington 1? Well, Washington sets the precedents. He helps establish the nation. Lincoln is in many ways building on and leaning towards things Washington has done. Lincoln has a model in Washington. That's why I give him the edge. But if someone wants to argue Lincoln, I absolutely see the case. You could say, well, the crisis may even be bigger. Maybe it is. Although I think throwing off the greatest power in the world at that time is probably harder than defeating the South at that point. But I think any list, and I've said this, I'll say it again, any list that does not have Washington and Lincoln as 1 and 2 is I can't take it seriously.
Yeah, and look, I don't tend to focus too much on these lists as far as the best or the worst or anything. I think that they're fun, and they're just fun ways to talk about stuff, because you could say, oh, I like, Coolidge, right? And I'd be like, oh yeah, well, I'm a Gerald Ford guy or whatever, right? I solidly believe he should be at number 36 or whatever on the rankings.
Yeah, no,
it's fine. These are fun ways to talk about history, ultimately. So nobody get upset that we didn't put William Henry Harrison in your top 6, or anyone else like that.
Or the cult of the Kennedys or something.
Kennedy's an interesting guy. My this because you gave my son a copy of your book for Christmas a couple of years ago. Thank you. My son is very much into presidents, and I love this because talking about presidents is a fun way to engage students into history. And so the other day, he comes to me and goes, Dad, it's like Washington is always my number 1. He's a big Washington guy. My younger boy, Benjamin's a Lincoln guy. These are conversations we have in the Herbert household. He goes, and I love JFK, and it's interesting, and I think he's kind of caught up in the aura. And he's like, but I'm really starting to feel about Theodore Roosevelt. I'm like, all right, I'm doing something right here. So Kennedy's an interesting guy because his presidency doesn't last long enough, and I don't know. It gets, it's hard. It's a hard presidency to analyze, like a couple of the other ones that were cut tragically too short for other reasons.
And I'm just saying that as you know, in these things, there's often a mystique bias and a recency bias.
Yeah.
But when you get in some of those late 19th, early 20th century presidents, a lot of,
Can I tell you the one, and we actually mentioned earlier, Garfield. Man, I so much wish we could have seen a Garfield presidency to know what would have happened. And it probably would have been a disappointment. Here's the thing I always tell people when it comes to presidencies. When we talk about, this is a good president, this is a bad president, right? A great example. I think I'm really thinking a lot about Jimmy Carter recently because people's like, Carter's presidency was a failure. And the question I have for people when they say that is, name someone of the time who could have done better in the circumstances. And I think that's a question we don't often ask, right? It's like,
that's
who could have done better than Carter during that 4 years?
That's also what we talked to, speaking about how, the founders are looked at that, I would have done X or I could have.
Would you have though? Right.
It's saying,
if you grew up in Virginia in 1751 with all of the things that were right around you, right? And I think this brings up back to the big question about the presidency. That's what we're trying to get to is this. I think the role, Craig, of the presidency is by nature so impossibly difficult that having an average presidency is a victory. And the fact, I really believe this, right? I think that it's the job almost guarantees that you're going to do poorly at it because it's so hard. How do you take a guy like Herbert Hoover, who has wildly succeeded at so many other things in his life and is clearly an intellectual guy, cares about people, tries to do the right thing, gets hit with the Great Depression? It's like, how, I think the job is so hard. So when you have guys like Washington, like Lincoln, like an FDR, perhaps, the fact that they're able to succeed in their mission makes them almost superhuman.
The thing is, too, to be a great president, do you need a great crisis? Does a great crisis, is that what reveals?
It's a great question. Yeah. It's a great question. And I could see that being the central point around a debate in a great class, which brings me to the close, Craig. One of my great regrets is that I already have my doctorate in history and that I couldn't sit here and take a class from you, buddy, because every time we sit and talk about the presidency, and I really mean this, the reason why I asked you to come on today, I just love your insight on the presidency, on pop culture, on all of these things around us and so forth. Craig, this was an absolute blast. Thank you, buddy, for we did this kind of last minute.
Yeah. This is the first,
I think we arranged this while I was in the truck yesterday.
Yeah, and this is the first time we've ever done, there's ever been discussion of a movie that doesn't exist, I think. So maybe this could start a whole series for you, historical films that need to be made.
I think that would be a lot of fun. Yeah. So think about that and so forth. So everybody, thank you so much to Craig today. We did this last second. Thank you all for being here. We got more pods coming for you this next week, but there's a lot of great books. Craig, plug your book one more time, please.
American Honor, The Creation of the Nation's Ideals During the Revolutionary Era. That's the one that you can go buy right now. Got a book on the last year of the revolution that's coming out shortly.
Very exciting.
Working on the greatest man in the world, who is George Washington.
Awesome. Craig, buddy, thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thanks.